7 tanks come out of the smoke. They are American Shermans and Lees of the 1st Armored Division, and 44 of their sister tanks are still on the plain behind them, burning. The 51 of them rolled out an hour ago in clean parade formation across an open field east of a Tunisian village called Sidi Bou Zid, to relieve 900 American infantrymen trapped on a rocky hill 3 miles further east. None of those infantrymen will be relieved. Most of them will not come home. And the 7 tanks rolling out of the smoke are not even the worst thing that has happened to the United States Army today. It is the afternoon of February 14, 1943, and the United States is about to be humiliated. 3 months earlier, the United States Army had landed in North Africa for the very first time. Operation Torch. 70,000 soldiers stepping ashore from Casablanca to Algiers, expecting a fight against the German Wehrmacht. The fight they got was against the Vichy French, half-hearted, badly equipped, politically split. And it was over in 3 days. The American press took the victory at face value. Headlines back home announced that the American GI had arrived in this war and would now sweep the Germans into the sea. The American GI had not arrived in this war. He had merely landed in the same continent. By February 1943, the Wehrmacht he was supposed to sweep into the sea was concentrated in Tunisia. 2 German armies, 1 Italian, squeezed into the last Axis foothold in Africa. To their east, Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army was driving west out of Egypt. They had won at El Alamein and were closing the back door. To their west, the British 1st Army and the new American 2nd Corps were closing the front. The Tunisian mountains, 2 parallel ranges called the Eastern Dorsal and the Grand Dorsal, were the last walls of the trap. The Allies held the passes. The Germans were running out of fuel, ammunition, and time. On paper, the Axis was finished. On paper, the war in Africa would be over by spring. The man who held the southern hinge of the Allied line, the American end, was a Major General named Lloyd Fredendall. He commanded 2nd Corps. He had taken Oran from the Vichy French in 3 days at Torch, and Dwight Eisenhower, the Allied commander, had liked his energy. Eisenhower sent him to Tunisia to hold the most exposed sector of the line, the part facing the German panzer divisions, and to learn on the job. Fredendall's idea of learning on the job was to never visit the front. His headquarters was at a place his soldiers had nicknamed Speedy Valley, 9 miles southeast of the Algerian town of Tebessa and 70 miles behind the line he was supposed to defend. There, he had ordered an entire engineer regiment to spend 3 weeks blasting and drilling 2 U-shaped tunnels 160 feet into solid rock. Those tunnels were his command post. While American infantry froze on Tunisian hilltops with no anti-tank guns and no laid mines, Fredendall's engineers were dynamiting his bunker. When Omar Bradley first laid eyes on it, weeks later, Bradley called it, quote, an embarrassment to every American soldier. Fredendall ran his corps from inside the rock. He commanded by phone. He invented his own private code. Infantry units he called walking boys. Tanks he called elephants. Divisions he called houses. He bypassed his own division commanders and gave orders straight down to regiments and battalions, which meant nobody in his corps had a complete picture of where his own forces were. Worst of all, he had taken the 1st Armored Division, the most powerful armored formation in the American Army at that moment, and he had broken it into pieces. Combat Command A here, Combat Command B 40 miles away, separate battalions parked in passes too far apart to support each other. On the other side of the line, watching this was Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. The German general the British press had spent 2 years building into a legend. By February 1943, he was a sick man. Jaundice, blood pressure, ulcers, fatigue. He knew the war in Africa was lost. But Rommel, even at the end of his rope, had a soldier's eye for opportunity. And what he saw in front of him was an enemy he had never fought before. An American army that was green, dispersed, badly led, and unblooded. He decided to hit them while they still were. On the night of February 13th, Eisenhower himself drove forward to inspect the line. He found that the First Corps had not laid its minefields. The anti-tank guns were still in their packing crates. He told Fredendall, in person, to fix it before morning. Then he got back in his car and drove the long road back to Algiers in the dark. He reached his headquarters just in time to be told that, 4 hours after he had given the order, the Germans had attacked. 4 o'clock in the morning, February 14, 1943. From a pass called Fayed in the eastern dorsal, the German 10th Panzer Division emerges. From a pass called Maizila, 20 miles south, the 21st Panzer Division emerges. They drive toward each other across the Tunisian plain, both columns aimed at a single dust-blown village called Sidi Bou Zid. It is a textbook double envelopment. It is also the first time in the entire Second World War that an American armored force is engaged by a German armored force on equal ground. The Americans on the ground at Sidi Bou Zid are commanded by Brigadier General Raymond McQuillan, Combat Command A of the 1st Armored Division. McQuillan's tanks are dispersed. His infantry support, the 168th Infantry Regiment of the 34th Division, is dispersed even worse. 900 men sit on a rocky hill called Jebel Lasouda, north of the village, and 1,700 men sit on a rocky hill called Jebel Kasserine, south of the village. Both hills are good observation posts. Neither hill is connected to anything else. Neither hill can be retreated from quickly. By 10 o'clock that morning, German tanks have driven past both hills and joined hands behind them. The American infantry on Lasouda and Kasserine are now surrounded. They watch from above as the panzers roll west toward Sidi Bou Zid, toward the rear, toward the place where their own friends are. They cannot move. Their commanders, Lieutenant Colonel John Waters at Lasouda, by the way, the son-in-law of George Patton, and Colonel Thomas Drake at Kasserine, can only call in by radio and watch their own war happen without them. By midday, Sidi Bou Zid itself is on fire. The American tank line in front of the village, a battalion of Stuart light tanks and a battalion of Lees and Shermans, fights for a few hours and is bled white. By dusk on the 14th, McQuillan has been pushed 8 miles back. The 168th Infantry on the hills is encircled, and 100 American tanks are smoking on the plain. Now, in the bunker at Speedy Valley, Lloyd Fredendall picks up the phone. He calls Major General Orlando Ward, commander of the 1st Armored Division. Ward is the man whose division Fredendall has personally broken into pieces. Ward has been begging for days for permission to concentrate his armor. Now Fredendall tells him to launch a counterattack. With what? Ward asks. With the only fresh tank battalion left to him, the 2nd Battalion, 1st Armored Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel James Alger. 51 tanks, mostly Shermans, some Lees. Their orders: cross the open plain east of Sidi Bou Zid, drive through the German positions, and relieve the surrounded infantry on Jebel Lasouda. Alger's tankers do not know the ground. They do not know the strength of what is in front of them. They are inexperienced. Most have never fired a shot in anger before this morning. And they are about to attack across flat, open desert in broad daylight, in a clean parade ground formation, into a position where the enemy has had 24 hours to dig in his guns. The German commander watching them through field glasses is a colonel named Hans Reimann of the 10th Panzer Division. He has, somewhere in his weapons mix, a battery of 88mm anti-tank guns, the dreaded German flak gun that doubles as the most accurate tank killer of the war. And he has them concealed and zeroed for the exact range his enemy is now approaching. The Americans roll forward at 15 miles an hour, tanks abreast, antennas swaying, a perfect target. The 88s open up at 1,000 yards. 6 tanks burn in the first minute. The American formation does not break. The American formation has not been trained for this. The tanks keep going. The 88s keep firing. By the time the survivors realize that they cannot push through, that there is no way to push through, most of the battalion is dead. 44 Shermans and Lees burning on the plain, 7 coming back through the smoke. Lieutenant Colonel Alger himself is captured. The 2nd Battalion ceases to exist. That is the first day. The second day, on Jebel Lasouda, Lieutenant Colonel John Waters, Patton's son-in-law, runs out of ammunition and water. He surrenders. He will spend the rest of the war in a German prison camp. Some 450 of his men slip through the German lines on foot at night and reach American positions. The rest, 500 Americans, go into the bag. On Jebel Kasserine, Colonel Drake holds out one more night. He receives a radio order to break out. He tries. The Germans run his column down in the open. The 168th Infantry Regiment of the Iowa National Guard, the regiment that landed in North Africa with the dreams of Davenport and Cedar Rapids in its kit bags, effectively ceases to exist as a unit. By morning, 3 weeks of training and 10 years of garrison soldiering and hundreds of Iowa farm boys and storekeepers' sons are inside German barbed wire. 2 days, 2 American hilltops, 1 American tank battalion, 48 hours in, and now the line breaks. On February 17th, the 1st Armored Division falls back through the next town west, a place called Spatla. The retreat is supposed to be conducted in good order. It is not. American tank crews, exhausted, set fire to their own ammunition trucks by accident in the dark. The detonations panic the rear areas. Engineers blow bridges before American units have crossed them. Trucks are abandoned with the engines running. Equipment burns on the roads. A young war correspondent named Ernie Pyle, walking among the retreating columns, will later write that he had never seen American soldiers look like this. And west of Spatla, watching all of this from the German side, Erwin Rommel finally arrives at the front with his own staff. He sees what Arnhem has handed him. He sees the burned hulks. He sees the empty road. He sees a 100-mile gap in the Allied line where there used to be an American corps. And he understands, the way only Rommel can understand, that this is the chance. If he can drive west through the Grand Dorsal Mountains, through a place called Kasserine Pass, into the open ground beyond, he can reach the Allied supply hub at Tebessa. He can swing north and roll up the back of the British First Army. He can buy Axis Africa another season. He starts asking for permission. This is where it gets German. Because Rommel does not actually command all the Axis forces in Tunisia. Hans-Jürgen von Arnhem's 5th Panzer Army, the Panzer divisions doing most of the killing right now, is a separate command. Comando Supremo, the Italian High Command, technically owns the theater. Albert Kesselring, the German commander of the Mediterranean, technically arbitrates. And Rommel, the desert legend, has to ask all 3 of them for the panzer divisions he needs to actually finish what Arnhem started. Arnhem says no. Arnhem wants a shorter, safer, more cautious thrust, northwest toward the town of Le Kef. He does not want to give Rommel his panzers. Kesselring, 3 days later, splits the difference. He gives Rommel the panzers. He limits the objective. Rommel has now lost 48 hours of operational tempo. The Americans, in those 48 hours, retreat. They abandon the town of Gafsa. They abandon Feriana. They blow up their own airfield at the Lept and stream west in the dark. 12,000 soldiers, hundreds of vehicles, no real plan, moving away from the enemy because nobody at Corps headquarters can decide what to move them toward. It is now February 19th. The road into the Grand Dorsal Mountains funnels through one place. 2 miles wide, flanked by limestone cliffs, the Tunisian sun catching the rocks white as bone. A pass called Kasserine. In Speedy Valley, Lloyd Fredendall finally orders the pass blocked. He gives the job to Colonel Alexander Stark of the 26th Infantry Regiment. Stark is to take his regiment, gather up whatever stray engineers and anti-tank battalions and lost units he can find on the road, and hold the door shut. Stark looks at the door. The door is already swinging open. Dawn, February 19th. Rommel attacks Kasserine. He attacks the way the Wehrmacht in 1943 still knows how to attack, two thrusts working together. German panzer grenadiers of the Afrika Korps Assault Group walk the high ground above the pass, climb the cliffs, get above Stark's men, fire down. Italian Bersaglieri infantry, feathered helmets picked from Mussolini's best, push frontally up the road. Rommel's command Storch buzzes overhead, low and slow, while he watches the fight from the air. Stark's task force is a patchwork. His own 26th Infantry Regiment, a battalion of green engineers, some anti-tank units, some artillery. Almost none of these units have ever trained together. None of them have prepared positions inside the pass. They have a few hours. By the morning of the 20th, the pass is open. German columns spill out the western mouth into the open ground beyond and split. Rommel personally takes his Afrika Korps Assault Group under Brigadier General Karl Bulovius and drives west, toward Tebessa, toward the Allied supply hub. The 10th Panzer Division turns north, toward a small Tunisian road junction called Thala on the road to Lekef. Two thrusts, two open doors. And on the Allied side, two men have to slam them shut at the same time. The man who slams the western door is Brigadier General Paul Robinette. Robinette commands Combat Command B of the 1st Armored Division, the one part of the 1st Armored Division that Lloyd Fredendall did not break into pieces. Robinette is a small man with a giant reputation, a cavalry officer of the old school, fluent in French, profane, blunt, and very, very good. His CCB has fought in Tunisia for 2 months. They know what the Germans look like coming out of a draw. They know what an 88 sounds like when it fires. Robinette's people position themselves on a ridge called Jebel El Hamra, south of Tebessa, on the high ground astride the German axis of advance. When Bulovius's lead elements come up the road, Robinette's tanks are dug in turret down on the reverse slope, and his artillery is registered on every coordinate in front of him. The Germans probe. Robinette's people answer. The Germans probe harder. Robinette's people hold. By the evening of the 21st, Bulovius understands that the Tebessa thrust is a thrust into a wall. He stops. That is the first door, slammed. Now the second door. The road north out of Kasserine Pass climbs for 30 miles to the small Tunisian town of Thala. Thala sits on the road to Lekef. Lekef sits on the back of British 1st Army. If 10th Panzer takes Thala, the entire Allied position in northern Tunisia is flanked. The man holding Thala is Brigadier Cameron Nicholson of the British 6th Armoured Division. Nicholson does not actually have a division. He has whatever pieces of the 6th Armoured were closest to the road on the morning of the 20th, plus whatever pieces of British, French, and American units have been streaming north through the panic. He calls the resulting scratch force Nick Force for himself, and he commands it from the top of a hill outside the town. His best armor is the British 26th Armoured Brigade under Brigadier Charles Dunphy. His artillery is a mix of British and American guns. His infantry is whoever showed up. He has not slept in 3 days. On the morning of the 21st, he sends Dunphy forward to delay the Germans on the road south of Thala. Dunphy sends forward a smaller mixed group, a company of motor infantry, 11 tanks, an artillery battery, an anti-tank troop, under a major named Cameron Gore. They call it Gore Force. Gore Force fights for 11 hours against the lead element of 10th Panzer. By nightfall on the 21st, almost every man in Gore Force is dead, captured, or wounded. Almost every tank is burning. But they have bought 11 hours. In those 11 hours, 2 things arrive at Thala from the rear. The first is the rest of Dunphy's brigade. The second is, of all things, the artillery of the United States 9th Infantry Division. The 9th Division's artillery is commanded by a one-eyed brigadier named Stafford Leroy Erwin. 4 days earlier, Erwin's gunners had been in Morocco. He had received a phone call. He had been told to move east. He had loaded his guns, and he had marched 800 miles across Algeria in 4 days. Gun crews sleeping in shifts in the trucks, drivers napping at the wheel and being slapped awake. He had reached the Tunisian border on the afternoon of the 21st of February. He had been guided up the road to Thala in the dark. The night of February 21st into the morning of February 22nd, 1943, Thala. The Germans are now half a mile from the town. Dunphy's tanks are firing in the dark over the heads of British and French infantry on the forward slope. Nicholson is up the hill, in radio contact with everyone and everything, holding the line by sheer force of personality. And behind him, behind the British armor, behind the British infantry, behind the line of British 25-pounders already firing, the 9th U.S. Division's artillery unlimbers in the dark. 48 howitzers, American 105mm guns. Their crews have not slept in 4 days. They have never fought before. They cannot see the enemy. They aim by map, by compass, by the radio voice of a British forward observer none of them have ever met. They open fire blind, over British heads, into the dark. The German 10th Panzer Division on the road to Thala has, in the previous 24 hours, taken steady losses to British armor and to the lead American gunners. Now, after midnight, an entirely new artillery group opens up. Whole regiments of fire. The German lead element takes more punishment than it has taken since Alamein. By the morning of the 22nd, the German commanders south of Thala are reporting to Rommel that they have broken into nothing, that the road into Thala is now closed, and that their fuel is gone. Rommel walks his command post at first light. He hears the same news from Bulovius at Jebel El Hamra, stopped. He looks at his maps. He looks at his fuel state. The whole offensive depends on him reaching either Tabessa or Le Kef before the Allies can react. He has reached neither. He has run out of road. He gets in his Fiesler Storch, the small single-engine spotter plane he uses as a command vehicle, and flies to a hilltop at Kasserine itself, where Albert Kesselring is meeting him. The conversation is short. Rommel makes his case. Kesselring agrees. The offensive is over. On the morning of February 23rd, the Germans pull back through Kasserine Pass with the same professional speed with which they came in. Demolitions on the bridges, mines in the road, rear guards on the high ground. The Allies, exhausted and shocked, follow at a crawl. There is no decisive American counterstroke. There cannot be. The men who fought at Sidi Bou Zid and Spatla 4 days ago are not the same men they were 4 days ago. They have been ground hollow. By the 24th, the front is approximately back where it was on the 13th. 6,500 American casualties, 300 dead, 3,000 wounded, 3,000 captured, 183 tanks lost, half of them captured intact, 208 artillery pieces, 500 trucks, 7,000 replacements needed to bring Second Corps back to fighting strength. And now Dwight Eisenhower has a decision to make. He acts on March 4th. Lloyd Fredendall is relieved by indirect signal. He is sent home to a stateside training command. He is, to keep the public eye off the disaster, quietly promoted to lieutenant general on the way out. He will retire in 1946. He will never command troops in combat again, and he will outlive almost everyone in this story, dying in 1963 in his garden. The bunker at Speedy Valley will sit empty in the Tunisian rock for decades, slowly filling with sand. It is still there. On March 6th, Major General George S. Patton arrives at 2nd Corps headquarters at Jebel Quif in a half-track convoy with sirens. He brings his deputy with him, Brigadier General Omar Bradley, the man who had been Eisenhower's eyes at the front, the man who had told Eisenhower the truth about Fredendall's bunker. Within weeks, Patton will be pulled back to plan the invasion of Sicily, and Bradley will inherit the Corps. Both men will run armies in Europe. Both will end the war as full generals. And the Corps they take over from each other in 1943, the Corps that ran at Sidi Bou Zid, is the Corps they remake. 3 weeks after Kasserine, on March 23, 1943, The same Second Corps, many of the same men, the same units, the same equipment, engages 10th Panzer Division at a place in Tunisia called El Guettar. The Germans attack. The Americans hold their ground. The Americans counterattack. The American artillery fires for effect. And 10th Panzer Division, the Panzer Division that had crushed the Americans at Sidi Bou Zid on St. Valentine's Day, is stopped cold. Same units, different army. On the German side, Erwin Rommel never returns to Africa. He flies home sick on March 9th. The army he leaves behind, the Heeres Group Africa, will run out of fuel and ammunition over the next 9 weeks. On May 13, 1943, it will surrender. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers will go into Allied prisoner of war cages, a number larger in raw count than Stalingrad. The Mediterranean will be open. Italy will fall in 18 months. France will follow. The men who will land at Normandy on June 6, 1944, will not be the men who ran at Sidi Bou Zid. They will fight as combined arms: armor, infantry, artillery, and air power. Co-equal, interdependent, hitting as one fist. That doctrine will be written into a U.S. Army field manual called FM 100-20 in July 1943, 4 months after Kasserine, and it will remain American doctrine ever since. Kasserine Pass is not the place where the United States lost a battle. Kasserine is where the United States learned how to fight one. The price of that lesson was 6,500 men.